Good to have you back, Steve. So just remind us about what you do and also your teaching experience to date, please, if that's okay.
Yeah, hi Phil. Well, I'm presently the head of sixth form at a small sixth form in Lincoln. Previous to that, I've had several roles on SLT, uh, teaching and learning, but also behaviour management, and was a deputy head for some time in quite a large secondary school. So I've had quite a broad experience of over 30 years of teaching in secondary schools.
Okay, so obviously sounds like you're a very experienced and established teacher. What kind of teacher do you think you are, or do you see yourself as?
Well, now, and it's an interesting question, Phil, because I'm definitely not the teacher I was when I started. I think uh, that's quite important. I think in what we're going to talk about in a few minutes. I think I like to think I'm very engaging and very thoughtful about the way I deliver the content I deliver, and it's one of those where I very rarely use the same resources twice, which might some people might think is mad. Uh, but I like to be creative, and I like to change. I like to change the scenery. Um, so certainly not the teacher I was when I started. A very much different teacher. Um, but I like to think I'm engaging. I like to think that students enjoy my lessons.
Mm. What,
Uh,
what's the biggest difference, would you say, between when you first started, or like maybe the first, say, 5 years of your teaching, compared to what you do now in terms, like, when you say that, my approach is very different, but how is it different?
Well, I think when I first started teaching, I was under the false impression that it was all about personality and delivery and, if you like, commanding the space and being the biggest personality in the room and being quite, um, what's the word for it? Domineering, I think, in the classroom, a dominant force in the classroom that almost bent the students to my will in some ways. Um, and I think I grew up and was trained and learned as a teacher. When there were some teachers like that around at the time, um, but also at the same time there was the old phrase. That don't smile till Christmas. I don't know if you've ever heard that phrase. Yeah,
Yes. Yep.
don't smile till Christmas. And that seemed to be mm, the right thing to do, according to lots of people at the time. I've since discovered that I was mistaken about that, and I think I'm a much better teacher now because I've gone on a journey away from thinking it was all about potentially me and what
Mm.
I did, uh, and started to think about more about them and what they do in the classroom. Um, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What changed? What made you take a different approach?
Well, I discovered that I wasn't as good as I thought I was. I wasn't as effective as I thought I was. I wasn't planning my lessons as thoroughly as I perhaps should have been. I wasn't getting the results for the students um, that I should have been, um, and that came as a bit of a shock. Um, Being quite a confident teacher, practitioner, quite a larger than life sometimes person in the classroom. Um, and it's not all about performance. I discovered, and there's more to it than that, and you have to be a little bit more thoughtful about the way you plan, and
Mm,
about the things you do, and the things that you want them to do, and why it is you want them to do it, and how are they going to do it in
mm.
lots of ways. So yeah,
What
so
what do you
that
mean?
was a change.
What do you mean by performance? I think I
Well, I
understand
think,
exactly what you're talking about, but I just wanted to like just to make sure
well,
that we're thinking about the same thing.
it, it's, I mean, I think students need to be able to do, they need to know more, but they also need to do more. And I think that you need to make sure that the space for them to do what they need to do. And you need to be able to facilitate that, plan that, and allow that to happen.
Mm,
Um, Obviously within, the behaviour policy the school has, but you can't simply um, decide they're going to do something and then make square holes, round blocks, a block, a circular hole and a square block and a big hammer. You can't make that work all the time. You've got to be a lot more subtle than that, a
mm,
lot more um, student orientated. I feel.
mm,
So that's certainly the way I am now. I don't think there's still an element of performance in what I do, but there's also a much more balanced approach into what my expectations of them are, and how I can nurture them. And you
mm,
can't nurture them if you are putting on a performance all the time. You need to create space.
mm,
In sense, in what was the phrase? Don't want to quote Depeche Mode too much, but you need to sometimes enjoy the silence.
mm,
So silence is good. To create the space for them to think and to learn, rather than consistently being the biggest, loudest person in the room.
mm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. When did you start changing your approach? Like, can you remember if there was a particular point where you started to change your approach because you thought, because you realized, like you said, that you weren't as good as you thought you were, or was it a much more gradual kind of process?
Yeah, I mean, you can't. I think a couple of things really. When I first started teaching, I was really lucky to have a very able GCSE history class, and because they were so able, I mean, they were setted. I don't agree with setting anyway. I like to teach mixed ability, but they were setted, and they I taught them for a year, and they got some absolutely outstanding results, A's and A stars, and back in the day when we had letters.
Mm,
And then the year after, I picked up what was the other set,
mm,
and it quickly became apparent that the way I'd approached teaching the more able students wasn't really what was making the difference. What was making the difference was their innate ability in the first place.
mm,
I was just encouraging them. I wasn't actually having to teach them because they were very able,
mm,
and all I did was to motivate them, and whereas the other group of students that I took on the year after, I had to very quickly realised that I couldn't. It wasn't going to work that way, because
mm,
there were, in a sense, there were things missing that actually had to put into place myself, and I had to plan to do that,
mm.
and I had previously had to do it.
Yeah.
So I discovered quite quickly, and was very disappointed when their results were not as good as I wanted them to be.
Mm,
That there's no good blaming the students.
Mm.
actually, because they weren't getting it. Start reflecting on yourself and thinking about, well, what is it that you're doing that isn't allowing them
Mm.
to engage with it in the way they need to. So from that point onwards, I started to gradually change um, the way I taught and think a lot more carefully about how I planned the lesson, um, and also think about how the lessons content and the ideas fitted together in a much more cohesive
Mm.
continuum, if you like, rather than and allowing the students to see the bigger picture, and so they could actually make sense of the journey.
Mm.
When some of them found that quite difficult. Um, um, so yeah, it was quite soon on in my career, but
Mm.
it takes a while to start
Yeah.
to go almost go back to the beginning again, really, and start again. I mean, because previously to that, bizarrely, my first teaching practice when I was training at PGCE was all A level teaching at a sixth form college. So I've gone
Mm.
from a 8 weeks placement teaching 4 different A levels to secondary school with no A levels,
Mm.
and having this really able class of kids who all got A's and A stars, thinking, oh, this is easy, and then finding out really quickly after that that it wasn't easy at all,
Mm.
and it was, and, I had to think a little bit more carefully about them and not so worry about myself so
Mm.
much, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to the style of your teaching, I know, like, obviously,
Mm.
as you're experienced, you probably use many different tools, sort of
Mm.
like, depending on who it is and things like that. But I think most of us probably have a particular style that we kind of, either stick to, or like, just it's more consistent than other approaches that you may occasionally use. So if I was to suddenly come into your classroom one day and you're teaching a lesson, what kind of teacher would I be seeing? What kind of stuff do you do? And what would be really important in your lesson that you kind of make sure that you do every single time?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd say it depends who I'm teaching, because the way I teach depends on the class I've got in front of me.
Mm.
So yeah, I like to feel that these days I'm the teacher they need me to be, not like the teacher I think I'd like to be, if that
Mm.
makes sense. So if it was a year 8 mixed ability class, for example, that would be very different to a year 10 GCSE class,
Mm.
or an A level class.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there are some fundamentals that I use certainly from Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4.
Mm-hmm.
So, in many respects, I keep the behaviour management as simple as I possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
Um, really straightforward, really simple rules that everybody can understand. So there's nothing vague about it. It is what it is within the school behaviour system. So I operate what I like to call as a one voice classroom.
Mm.
Now, that doesn't mean to say that there's no discussion. What that actually means is that one person speaks at once.
Mm.
So that might be me, but just as equally, it might be another member of the class.
Mm.
So that means that if I ask a question, everybody's listening, and everybody um, listens to the answer,
Mm.
which is just as important as the question. And also, if the students ask me a question, um, I insist on one voice so that the rest
Mm.
of the class can listen to the dialogue that I have with the students.
Mm.
Um, so that's the golden rule, um, that I always have a one voice classroom, and it's not always mine, and it increasingly is less and less mine as the
Mm.
students get older. But the students I've taught over the years will know quite straight away That's the golden rule. And I think
Mm.
that underpins everything else you want to do. It underpins all the instructions you give. It underpins the questions they want to ask, and it makes the students feel safe. And it's about equality as well.
Mm.
Nobody gets to hog the time.
Mm.
Um, the other thing that you would see is a clear and routine. Same use of words, more or less, the same expectations every single time. So it might be old-fashioned, but the students come in and they stand behind the chairs.
Mm.
Right, they will, and I will then give them instruction. Right, I want you to do this. I want you to do that. I want you to do the other. Really quickly, let's get on with it. But that happens all the time.
Mm.
So we got no, there's no grey area with that. That
Mm.
is what I expect them to do. So that's a routine that always happens, and I don't start until I've got a moment of silence. You don't have to be silent for long.
Mm.
You need to mark the start of the lesson
Mm.
with a pause and recognition, and then you go from there.
Mm.
So you would see that in all of my lessons, and you'd even see that in the sixth form. I wouldn't expect the sixth form to sit behind their chairs, but there would be a moment and a pause of silence before the lesson starts,
Mm.
just so that we um, mark the beginning and end of something, if that makes sense,
Yeah. Yeah.
and where to where the boundary is. I mean, at the moment at the school I work at, we operate something we call STAR. So, it's, you need to track the teacher, sit up straight, pay attention, no disrupt truancy, all of those things, which I like to try and take for granted in my lessons anyway, because I very rarely sit down.
Mm.
So I'm moving around the classroom all the time. Sometimes I'm giving instructions from the front, sometimes from the back, sometimes from the middle.
Why do you do
Uh,
that?
well, because I like to inject a bit of energy into the room, and a little bit of pace, and it's
Mm.
difficult to do that from sitting down. You can see who immediately is on task and who isn't on task by walking around the room. You don't need to make a fuss in front of the whole class. If somebody just needs a quick reminder, you can
Mm.
just say quite quickly, come on. And sometimes you don't even have to say anything. You just, use your body language, or you use your presence to remind them where they're at. And you
Yeah.
don't stop the lesson.
Mm.
You move around, and you get them to be purposeful as quickly as you can, reminding them all the time of the basic expectations that you might need in the classroom, like
Mm.
simple things like, okay, we're going to underline, let's underline the title, right? Remember what we're doing. Today's date is, right, the focus of this lesson will be, and then almost without fail, there's a recap task
Mm.
that recaps on where we were the last time we met.
Mm.
So I quite often would use a phrase like that. Okay, where were we the last time we met? What have you brought back to the lesson?
Yeah.
We had the lesson, you've taken it away. What have you managed to bring back?
Mm.
Let's talk about that. So we go straight into a really quick and purposeful recall.
Mm-hmm.
It might only last 2 or 3, 5 minutes, depending on whether I come across some misconceptions that are left over from the previous lesson.
Mm.
And then I might stop and take a little bit longer to make sure that they haven't brought something back that isn't actually correct, so their
Mm.
understanding is where I want it to be. And then we'll move into what I'd like the lesson to be about,
Mm.
uh, fairly reassured that the building blocks from the previous lessons are still in place, and then we move on from there. So we have a lot of cold calling, but I mix that up with hands as well,
Mm.
depending on. I don't allow some students to dominate the discussion. So I might say something like, okay, you've done all the work. You need to take a break. This is for somebody else, okay. I'm sure you know what I mean, Phil, yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, so, and one of my strengths I feel is in my questioning. and I do quite a bit of work with colleagues about questioning and why we question and why questioning is important and why
Mm.
the answer you get is more important than the question you ask a lot of the time, and because it reveals so much about students. And sometimes, if I'm lucky, I can encourage them to ask me a question,
Mm.
which is even better because that
Yeah.
is them thinking about their knowledge and trying
Mm.
to fill the gaps in themselves. And that is even better way to recap as well. So you will see all of that.
When you talked about cold calling,
Mm.
have you ever encountered any issues with that? And if so, how did you overcome whatever that issue is?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because you need to think about the question you're asking and who you're going to ask it of. So it isn't random cold calling in that sense, Phil. It'd be like if you know your class well enough and you've got the questions you want to ask in the sequence you want to ask them, they generally become more in depth and intricate the third or fourth question in potentially. Yeah.
Hmm.
So if you've got an underconfident student that you ask them the first question. So that'll be the introductory answer, and then
Mm.
you'll pick up. So you're less likely to get resistance there because it's an easy answer.
Yeah.
But it gets them involved straight away. It gets them into the conversation. They
Mm.
feel some self-worth as well. You can check whether they actually
Yeah.
understand it. If they really don't know, right, and they really feel uncomfortable, you would say, "Well, I'll come back to you,"
Mm.
and then you do that, and you do come back to them. Um, but you're right. Um, not all students feel comfortable um, talking in front of others.
Mm.
Some of them will give you a very simple, rudimentary answer, but that's fine as long as you got them involved. So yeah, I don't know. You might say something like, "Okay, so last lesson we looked at the Battle of Hastings. Okay. So when you go right, who can remember the date? Well, everybody knows. And I'll go, okay. And the underconfident ones think, well, this is my chance. I can contribute now. And I go,
Mm.
it's 1066. Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. So you might, well, so what month was that then? And you'll go to somebody else.
Mm.
Right. Okay. What, what date in the month? Oh, yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Where was it exactly? It wasn't really at Hastings, was it? And then you've got like, you've gone on from the initial question.
Mm.
You've thought carefully about the sequence of questions. So you won't go in with a really high level expectation of a response.
Mm.
You'll allow that everybody in the room to have a chance at answering it, and eventually you might say, "Oh well, let's just is that actually right? Or have we missed something out here?
Mm.
Is there a little bit of detail we need to add into that answer?" And then you allow the really maybe the more able students to come back to you and say, "Well, actually, sir, it was that and that,"
Mm.
and then you've done it. But
Yeah.
because you've got a one voice classroom, everybody's listening to the exchange, and then the students who are less um, able, I don't like to use that word, but the ones who are moving at a slower pace potentially
Mm.
are gonna hear what you want them to hear as well. But it won't be you; it
Mm.
will be somebody else saying it, one of their peers saying it. Um,
Yeah. How would you deal with
so,
misconceptions?
well, quite straightforward. I mean, there's no beating around the bush with it. But for me, if something's wrong, it's wrong. And we need to hit these misconceptions head on. It's not put, oh, that's nearly right. Well, no, that's not right. And even in history and sociology, we do have an answer, Phil. There is an answer eventually. Some of them might be a bit vague, but you say, well, no, that's incorrect. All right. And we might stop the whole class and say, right, we've got an issue here. That is incorrect. This is correct. We must make sure that we've got the precise knowledge, because
Mm.
I'll say to them, there's no point committing information that's wrong into your short-term memory, because
Mm.
all you're going to do eventually is put it into your long-term memory, and if it's wrong, it's wrong, and all you're
Mm.
doing is remembering something that's incorrect. We can't do that.
Mm.
That is how learning works. So misconceptions get tackled with no mercy.
Yeah, yeah,
Put it like
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely no mercy. And it's not a personal thing with the student. I'll make it say, well, oh, hang on, something's gone wrong here. Well, this is something's gone wrong. We need to go back and look at it all together because we might have got the wrong idea, and
Mm,
then we go back and and relay the foundation again.
yeah, yeah,
Those kind of conversations are really important.
yeah.
They're fundamental to making progress. If you don't address the misconceptions, or you
Mm,
don't listen carefully enough to the answer, so the answer from a question is actually a misconception. You're just using the questioning as a filler until you've got your worksheet ready. That's really bad, really bad practice, in my opinion.
mm,
You got to, if you're engaging them in a conversation, it needs to be worthwhile.
mm.
So yeah,
Okay. Well, earlier you already kind of alluded to the fact that we're going to talk about planning for engagement. One of
yeah,
the questions that I'm really keen to ask you is what do you see as engagement? So obviously, if we're planning for engagement, it would be quite an
mm,
important thing to actually know what engagement looks like in a classroom
mm,
from your perspective.
mm,
And I think the other thing that you mentioned about behavior management, and obviously, like, we had a conversation prior to the podcast that engagement and behavior are kind of linked. So
mm.
I'm interested to know what kind of behavior, in your view, would equal engagement.
Okay. That- that's a that's a good question. Again, I mean, all students are kind of unique learners. I think we need to understand that. Um, for some students, engagement, their preferred engagement will be to write things down. For some students, their preferred engagement would be to discuss with the teacher. Um, for a few students, their preferred engagement would be to discuss something with each other.
Mm,
Some of them like to be told exactly what it is you want them to do. Some students, you can give them the option to be a little bit more creative with their engagement. And I think that's important sometimes because if you get too regimented about the structure of the way they engage, that can become problematic. I always think about the zones of proximal development. I always try to think about teaching what I want them to do in a space where they're most likely to be able to do it. In other words, what they can do with my assistance, um, and make sure that I try and hit a kind of a sweet spot, so that they can all engage with the material. In other words, they feel comfortable with it. They don't feel bored at one end, and they don't feel anxiety at the other end. So it's somewhere in the middle where
mm,
because engagement is about whether they can understand the content, whether they feel comfortable and confident and happy to have a go with
mm,
your support. And
hmm.
sometimes that's more important than the actual thing you get them to do. And I'm a great fan of saying, right, we're going to start small and we're going to get bigger, uh,
Hmm.
and then at the end we're going to have an answer to this question, and we're going to come back round to where we started. So I might say to them, I'm done with lesson intentions, Phil. I'll be honest with you. I don't use lesson intentions. Say, right, this is the question that we need to be able to answer at the end of this lesson today, if we possibly can. Right, and it'll lead on from where we've been before. Uh, and again, using the analogy of Battle of Hastings. It could be, okay, guys, by the end of this lesson, we need to be able to confidently say why we think that Normans won the Battle of Hastings. That's the big question. All right. So immediately they know, well, I know where this bus is going. Okay, I've got on the right bus. I know where I'm going. I don't need to be worried about that. So I'm feeling safe in that respect. And then you would break it down into chunks and be very specific about what it is you want to get out of those chunks. And then you add the chunks together, if you like, the bricks together, whatever they might be, and then you come to the conclusion at the end. Now, it might be that you give them a visual aid. You might be a visual aid you start with and say, okay, what can we see here? And they might annotate something. And then it might be, well, you've annotated it, and what can you see? What do you think that might mean? Can you draw a conclusion from what you've seen? And then you gradually move it forward in that respect and engage them. I would say maximum amount of time an activity should take is 10, 15 minutes maximum. And then you stop the class, right, okay, what we got? And then you do questioning again, and you look at the misconceptions, and you bring people in about what they've written or what they've drawn or what they've annotated. Okay, what have you got? I told you to get 5. How many have you got? You got 7. That's brilliant. Right, you got 2 more than I thought. What have you got? These are the ones I've got. What have you got? And then, okay, 3 guys at the back row. What have you got? And then you bring that in, and you try to bring the whole class with you. And then, so the engagement could be what they're writing, but then they use what they've written, what they've annotated, and they're going to use what they've written, what they've annotated, what they've thought about, and they can use what they thought about in the next stage, so that they never feel like they've done something that doesn't matter. It's always engaging in the process. And that means, I guess, going back to my teaching style, Phil, to do that, you have to be up and around. You have to be up and around, and you need to be looking at what they're doing in the books. You need to be encouraging them and saying, yep, that's a great idea. Yeah, have you thought about that? He's got this guy over here's got 10. You've only got 4. You know, it's those kinds of things that you get them to engage with the process. And there's a no blame culture, right? You know, there's no, so you're not going to be pulled up on not knowing something or not remembering something. So I'm going to fill the gap in for you, or somebody else is going to fill the gap in for you. The only thing you'd ever be pulled up on, it would be desktop truancy. In other sense, you're not doing it. You're not engaged. So there I would be working to make sure that the activities I've got them to do are accessible in the first place. All right. So that will depend on the class that I've got in front of me.
So would you say engagement has to be something that they can demonstrate to you by doing something, so that you can actually see what's going on? The reason why I'm asking that is because I'm just wondering if somebody could be sat at the back of the classroom listening to you, but don't really want to do anything, but they want to learn what you're talking about, and they're actively thinking about these things in their head, but then they don't necessarily feel like they're confident enough to actually articulate what they're thinking. And so do you see that for you as engagement? The reason I'm another reason why I'm asking really is because you talked about the style of your teaching being more like, getting everybody involved, and also like using group work, for example, where people working together, and then you kind of like, trying to get them to feedback to you what they've done.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, Phil, but it's almost like what I'm doing is a stimulus for them to think. And if they are thinking on their own, there is an expectation that at some point in the lesson they will have to write something down.
Mm.
And they know, because I've told them, that by the end of the lesson, they're going to have an idea of why the Normans won the Battle of Hastings.
Mm.
Now, if they just write a couple of things down and don't get too carried away with the discussion, that's fine. But at the end of the lesson, they will know that they are in free. They'll have the opportunity to express themselves in writing.
Mm.
Uh, and I guess one of the things I was going to say is that in my lesson, you'll find that the last 10, 15 minutes are normally times when the students will work in silence
Mm.
to bring together all their ideas, whether they've been written, whether they've talked about them, whether they've just been thinking about them, is what you just suggested.
Mm.
So they will have that opportunity. And you're quite right. There are students who won't be engaged, dramatically, or putting their hands up or getting involved in discussions, that there won't be.
Mm.
But when it comes to the writing, in the last 10 to 15 minutes, where the quiet is there, quite clearly, as you said, they've been thinking about it, they've been listening, they've been soaking
Mm.
it all up. And then what I find is that then that comes out in the last 10 to 15 minutes in the written work.
Mm.
And if you compared the quality of some of the written answers, you would without doubt find that the guys who've been the quietest have written the most articulate description.
Mm. Yeah. So how important is it to you that the last 10 to 15 minutes is spent writing in silence? I'm just thinking about this idea of silence, whether you see any particular value when it comes to this for the students, why that might be important to them.
Well, it's important to some because they like quiet to think, right? And to reflect on things. And I one of the things, I mean, it's like, really old fashioned, but I often say, look, you can't do two things at once. You really can't. You can't talk and discuss something and then articulate it in writing. You can't. I still believe that, because of the way language works and the way learning works, and knowledge in our brains work, that when you challenge yourself to write something down,
Mm.
it's got more chance of sticking
Yeah.
than if you didn't. And that might be quite an old-fashioned view. I don't know,
Mm.
but I still think it does, because you have to
Yeah.
stop and you have to think. You have to reflect on what's going on in the lesson in your own space,
Mm.
in your own head, and then you have to have the freedom that gives you to then articulate it and write it in the way you want to write it,
Mm.
regardless of anybody else around you. Because I think, learning is a very personal thing,
Mm.
and articulating what you think is a very personal thing. So they
Mm.
need that space, in a sense, to be themselves and to be individuals to articulate what they think they've learned. So yes, it is important to me, and some students will find that bit of the lesson more challenging than the other bit, and
Mm.
the guys who find that easier find that the bit at the start with the discussion more challenging.
Mm.
But if you do both, you've got a really good chance of keeping everybody engaged.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So if we were just before we move on to like the kind of specific strategies for like planning for engagement, I'm just wondering if you come across a student who is not wanting to engage despite what you're saying to them,
Mm.
um, or what you're setting for the class to do, making it very clear in terms of instructions, this is what we're doing and this is how
Mm.
we're going to get there. But they are clearly not interested in engaging at that point. What would be your
Mm.
approach to deal with that
Well,
situation?
I will make reasonable adjustments given on particular needs of the student as far as I can. I mean, there's always scaffolding going on, but you're quite right, Phil. Some students will just opt out anyway. Uh, and it depends on how they do that.
Mm.
Um, some students will opt out consistently
Hmm.
because they are probably not in a place where they can consistently access um, traditional, I won't say traditional, but access the lessons. Okay.
Mm.
Some students will opt out on one or two occasions for specific reasons,
Hmm.
you know, and whatever they might be, there might be something that is concerning them that's a barrier, then it might be a one-off, and in that
Hmm.
case, you can deal with that. There might be that you've got a teaching assistant in the room who knows students better than you, sits in more lessons than you. I have quite a good relationship with the TAs who come into my classroom, and he says, "Oh, they'll give me a quick warning about
Hmm.
where we are with a certain individual, depending on what kind of day they've had, and what there's always antecedents to these
Mm.
young people." Um, but we have to be clear: no school can operate without a clear and um, obvious and well managed behaviour policy.
Hmm.
There's if a student is going to disrupt the learning of others, then they need the opportunity to put that right in your classroom. They may need the opportunity to leave your classroom and come back and put it right. And if they don't want to, and it is disrupting the learning of others, eventually a school will need a system
Mm.
to allow them to go and have a refocus or a think about where they're at, or get their heads in the right place, or whatever it might be.
Mm.
Um, I mean, we can't sugarcoat that.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
mean, that happens to me very rarely, but it does happen.
Yeah.
And I think since COVID, we've seen a an increase in challenging behaviours from students.
Hmm.
And while we can make reasonable adjustments and we can do all the planning we like, some guys are going to turn up on specific days, and with the best will in the world, the things that got going on around them
Hmm.
um, don't put them in a place where they can even think about learning.
Hmm.
They've got more concerning things going on in their lives than your English or history lesson, if that makes
Mm.
sense.
Yeah.
And I think we have to recognise that, and there's systems in place to manage that, and to look after the students in that situation as well, because they're clearly not always in a great place, and
Mm.
they need the space to be able to reflect. Um, and whether we like it or not, um, schools can still be quite inflexible places
Mm.
for some students,
Yeah. Yeah.
particularly if they are living an environment where there are very few boundaries, if that makes sense.
Mm.
Um, I don't subscribe to the view that oh, they're all right for me. I mean, that's that old saying, isn't it? I'll never have any trouble with them. Well, that's
Mm.
probably because you haven't asked them to do anything for the last 2 years. But no, I'm just being cynical there. But you know what I mean, Phil? Yeah, we've all heard that, haven't we, in the past?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or in the staff room, oh, they're all right for me. I don't know what your problem is. Yeah, yeah, you have to understand that sometimes you're just not the most important person in their lives, and
Mm.
there's nothing you can
Yeah.
do about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you've got somebody like a teacher who is
Mm,
relatively inexperienced, and
mm,
they are really struggling to engage, a couple of classes that they have, because of the behavior issues that they experience. If we are already halfway through the academic year, like, we are
mm.
currently, what would be your advice for this person to try to re-engage the students?
Well, that's a good question, Phil. I can, and again, the context is really important there about what's the subjects, how old the kids are, what the teacher is like, how the personality of the teacher is like. It's very difficult to go back to basics halfway through a year.
Mm,
I know I use the throwaway phrase, don't smile till Christmas, but actually you've got to put the yards in right at the very start, haven't you, to set those
mm,
standards. I've seen lots of things done in the past, sometimes with team teaching.
yep.
Not sure I understand, not sure I'm sure not sure I think team teaching is as effective as it might sound. At some point, the other person won't be there,
Mm,
but you certainly can get support from colleagues.
yeah.
My thought originally would be first and foremost is I'll go back to the lessons I'm planning for the students,
Mm,
and I will look very carefully about what it is I'm trying to do, why I'm trying to do it, and how I'm trying to do it.
mm,
So, if you, for me, students behave or misbehave, or present challenging behaviour for not many reasons. One of them might be that the work you've tried to set them they can't actually do.
mm,
One of the reasons might be that the work you've set them is boring and it's too easy and they can do it. Okay. One of them might be that you set them a task that is just
mm,
really dull, and they have no interest in it whatsoever. Um, one of them might be that you are not using the school systems effectively enough
mm-hmm,
to make sure that you are supported by your colleagues, that you've allowed too many things to go.
mm-hmm,
One of the reasons might be that you've tried to make friends with the students, right? You're not there to be their friend. You're there, you can like them, you can get on really well with them, but you're not their friend, right? In the definition of what they see as a friend. I
mm,
mean, you are really, you're a friendly presence, aren't you? But you're not a friend as in a year 8 or a year 9 boy would have a friend. You
mm,
can't be. You need to use the reward system,
yeah.
and you need to have some straightforward fundamentals. You need to have high expectations. So it's really difficult in the middle of the year right now to go in and to change the way things have been. But again, for me, it starts with the planning of the lesson.
Mm,
What is it you want to do? Why do you want to do it? How are you going to do it?
yeah.
Have you planned that lesson with those students in mind?
Yeah.
Right? Not what you've got in mind, with them in mind. It's like if I give them that task to do, what is going to happen?
Mm,
Right? Is it going to go wrong? If you've been teaching these students for several months, you will have an idea about what is going to work and what isn't going to work. You can't keep going back and trying the same thing over and over again. You've got to plan the lesson. You need to be the teacher that they need you to be.
mm,
Now, sometimes you have to be really strict, and sometimes students may have to go and have a chat with their department in the time to time. You need to use the worst situations. Well, in my mind, are when teachers have gone in, they've not used the processes that are in place. They've not sought the support of their colleagues.
mm,
They've not had high enough expectations in the first place.
mm-hmm,
And then they lose control of the space, they lose control of the pace,
mm-hmm,
and they lose control of the purpose.
mm-hmm.
Um, and the only way you can really get that back is to look at yourself, look at what you're planning. Again, I'm saying it again, but it's about the third time I've said it. Look at what you're planning, what it is you want to do, why do you want to do it, how are you going to do it?
Mm. Okay, so now let's say somebody is now reflecting back on those three things in terms of like, what they're trying to do. So when it comes to the planning itself that would equal or likely to equal engagement in your book, what would be the key ingredients, would you say, that, you know, you it would be general enough that you can actually apply. So, like, are there specific things that you think would be really important in every lesson, regardless of like how, you know, because obviously earlier you mentioned something that I totally agree with. It depends on who you're teaching. I 100% get that. And so, but then are there any particular elements or ingredients that you think, like, regardless of that, some of this is going to help you to have a more successful lesson, or the planning of the lesson would be really important to make sure that you've got it in there? Would you say there are any ingredients like that?
Well, no, there are, and I think what I would say to a teacher, an early career teacher, is first and foremost, let's slow down, slow down. Let's do things at your pace, not their pace,
Mm,
right? Let's practice at getting the start of the lesson right, right? Let's start your lesson in the corridor, maybe line them up, make them understand that they're going into your space, and what happens in that space is up to you.
mm,
Okay. Now we're talking about a scenario here, Phil, where we've got an issue with behaviour.
mm,
So this is so it sounds quite regimented. So okay, um, you need to demonstrate that the space is theirs to use, but you're in charge of the space. So they're
mm,
not going to enter that space until you're happy with the way they are. So start. You can start the lesson in the classroom. They will line up. They will go in silence. They will stand behind their chairs. You will wait, all right, for that to happen. Now,
mm,
the best way to do that is to talk to your head of department or your colleagues. Say, I'm having trouble with this class. This is what I'm going to do. I might need some support. So I was a head of department and some of the young teachers come to me, I say, right, okay, we're going to slow this down. We're going to go back to the basics. I'm going to come and stand at the back of the room while this is happening. I'm not going to say anything,
mm,
right? I'm just going to be within earshot
mm,
while you do that. All right. And it will hopefully with the kind of things that they would do for you without even thinking about
mm,
the class. Okay. So, and then when you're ready, you control the pace. You move from where you want to be to where you want to be. You take the class with you. What you don't do is rush through because you're worried about what the class is going to do.
mm,
You need to slow down, stay calm. Do not, under any circumstances, give them the impression that you are flustered.
mm.
Now, that's easier said than done because I'm a 6 foot brummie, right? And it's easy for me to say. But my wife, for example, is not obviously not 6 foot brummie. um, she's very short, she's very small, but she plans her lessons and activities meticulously to
Mm,
reflect the needs of the students. All right, the students she's got in front of her. So you slow down, you calm down, and you're confident in what you plan the students to do. You own it. You're confident in it. You cut down on the transition phases in the lesson, right? You don't have 6, 7 transitions, right? We're going to spend 5 minutes doing that. We're going to spend 5 minutes doing that, and then 4 minutes doing that. Don't do that. Slow it
mm,
down. Be really clear about what you want them to do, by when you want them to do it, why you want them to do it. Stop the class. Okay, we've done that. Now we're going to move on to the next one.
mm,
If when you stop the class after an activity, it gives you an opportunity to reassert the expectations of behaviour in the classroom.
yeah.
So I'm not carrying on until we're all ready. Okay. Head of the department might pop their head in and go, everything all right? Yeah, no worries. Okay, back on it.
Mm,
The other thing I would say, Phil, is mark the books. Mark the books.
mm,
Take the books in, show them that you care about what they've written,
yep.
right? Mark the books. and give them an idea of why they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
Reward, catch them being good, reward them when they need to be.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. But that is only possible, rather, if you plan the lesson to allow them to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody likes to fail. Give them the opportunity to succeed. All right.
Mm.
Okay. And what I mean by that is, in some respects, success can be winding the teacher up. All right.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got a cover teacher, and we're going to give them hell. Right. We're going to wind them up. What we're going to do with them? Right. Sometimes you do need to think like the students.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and
100%.
the success must become from the things that you've planned. You've planned an activity that they can do and feel successful about and own. And if there are a couple of students in the room who are likely to dominate the proceedings, there's two ways you can go about it.
Mm.
My thought is I would always give that person something to do immediately.
Mm.
Give them some responsibility, give them some buy-in to the lesson, if
Yeah.
at all possible. All right. Get them engaged. Right. Would you mind doing this? Would you mind can you just pull that blind down? Right. Distract them,
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever it is, pull them in, and do it like that. That doesn't always work.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, you've got to plan it like because it won't come right unless you actually plan it really carefully.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And you ask for help. You use the behaviour policy that's in school, and you don't worry about using the behaviour policy.
Mm.
You can't see it as a failing if you are as a teacher. It's there for a reason. We
Yeah.
all use it. I've been teaching 30 years. I've been deputy head in charge of behaviour in a really difficult school in Lincoln. I use it,
Mm.
because that's why we designed it. It's there to be used,
Yeah.
to support teachers. It's not about being vindictive with the kids. It's about there to maintaining an atmosphere that is conducive to learning for the
Mm.
vast majority of the students in the institution. So don't feel bad
Yeah.
that you can't control the class straight
Mm.
away. But like I say, Phil, at this time of year, and it's going on in loads of schools all around the country. I'm sure it is. It's happening at our place now.
Mm.
All right. The best way to solve it is through planning, teamwork with your colleagues, and don't take it personally.
Mm. So when it comes to the planning, because so let's assume that this person who has been struggling with engaging students have now got to the point where they are able to control the class, so behavior is not really a problem. So the planning for engagement is more like an enhancement sort of process rather than trying to get them to give you the minimum amount of engagement so they can actually get on with the teaching.
Mm.
So to kind of like make it almost like a toolkit for for
Mm.
whoever's listening to this,
Mm.
if there were 5 things that were really important to planning for really good engagement that can lead to outstanding results, what would you say those 5 things should be?
Well, I would certainly go with recall. Start
Hmm.
with recall. Use whiteboards. Get the kids engaged immediately. Right. Um, and I'm going to find it difficult to do 5 after the other because I'm going to probably just circle back on myself, Phil. And I have to apologise for that. But with the recall, you need to understand why you're doing it. What questions are you going to ask? They need to be pre-planned.
Mm.
Right. Okay. Get them to engage. Have a bit of fun with them. I had a really interesting lesson with a year 8 class a while back. We were doing the Industrial Revolution, and I went in and change it up sometimes. Change up the activities that you do, not the expectations. So we got the whiteboards out. I said, right, okay, the first thing I want you to do is to draw a turnip, right? So they're all going, right, you got 10 seconds to draw a turnip. And they're looking at me, what on earth is you talking about? We're doing the Industrial Revolution. Why are we drawing a bloody excuse my French. What? That was a bit done. You might want to edit that, Phil. Anyway, why are we drawing a turnip? And I said, turnips are the most important vegetable that exist. They're looking at me like, turnips change the world, right? We would not be living in this society we live now without turnips. And they go, he's lost it. He's absolutely lost it. Humour is important. So they're right, hands up, show us your turnips, right? Up they go. Right, that's a carrot. You know, you want a carrot. What are you trying to do? Right, that's not funny. It's a carrot. That is a Swede. I'm sure it's a Swede. No, it's a turnip. Beetroot, right? I'm not sure what that is. So, you know, you do have to have a bit of humour. They won't go and say, why are we drawing carrot? Why are we drawing turnips? I said, I'm glad you've asked that question because I'm going to tell you, right? So you've got to mix it up sometimes, right? And of course, you probably know where I'm going with the turnips. We're going to talk about the agricultural revolution and the four crop rotation and why turnips revolutionised the way we farm. I said, right, star point for the best turnip at the end of the class, at the end of this class, right? So I've got my PowerPoint comes up, and I've got this animated turnip, right, with a big smile on his face, right? Okay, how to make the Industrial Revolution a little bit more entertaining, right? Okay, you got to think about it, have a bit of fun with them, because they're all having a bit of a giggle. And then I'm going, okay, right, remember the golden rule, one voice classroom, right? Go back down to where you want to be, right? I said, okay. So there's by the end of this class lesson, you're going to be able to tell me why I'm so excited about turnips, right? And I go, yeah, whatever. So the lesson progresses like that. But that was 10 minutes of fun at the start of the lesson.
Yeah.
And they're engaged. And I've thought about it. But I'm confident in what I want to do. And I know I've got a little video from Royal Holloway University that's going to explain why the turnip is the most important vegetable in the world. And I got clover, and I got wheat, and I got barley, and I got big cows, and I got dung, and I got all kinds of things. And before you know it, they can tell me how the turnip fits in to the population rise. So I've got a graph of the cities. Look how many people live in Birmingham. Like in 20 years, it's gone from that to that. That's enormous.
Yeah.
Where are they getting all this food from? And before you know it, they can tell you at the end of the lesson the connection between the turnip, the crop rotation, the amount of manure that's produced by the more cows you can feed, the fertility in the soil, and how the crop yield spirals out of control, how the price of bread falls, and how we can feed all the people in Birmingham. But that can only happen if you've laid the foundations previously.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other one I showed, but surgery. I can't, you've got me on a roll now, Phil. Surgery in the doing the health and the people. Right, okay. Here we go. We're going to amputate somebody's leg this morning. Who's up for having their leg amputated? No, don't try this at home because you'll probably get, but a bit of role play doesn't hurt. I need some volunteers. Right, I need a patient, I need a doctor, I need 4 people to hold the patient down because you're not going to do it, right? And then we talk about what's going to kill you in this scenario then, and they'll all be going, okay, he's going to bleed to this, he's going to die of infection, he's going to die of shock. Yep, you're absolutely right. And, and that is the kind of thing you need to do. And sometimes you need to plan your lessons in little groups. So you go, right, that's the fun lesson, this is the information lesson, and this is the consolidation lesson, right?
Yeah.
And if you get them trained like that, they'll know that in the consolidation lesson, that's the time where they are in their space, getting their thoughts together. Get them thinking and engaging in it. You got to think about something that's relevant to them. Sometimes you can shock them.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can do that, but I'm a history teacher. It's easy for me. I've got all the stories in the world I can use. I don't know how maths teachers potentially could do that. I never thought about that. but there's
Yeah.
no reason why you can't. Um, and certainly you can have loads of fun with science, can't you? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
Definitely.
all kinds of things you can do with science to keep it. But you got to do it with a smile on your face. You know, make them feel safe,
Mm.
make them feel like it's an event, not like you're bored to be there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Anyway, that's just me. Sorry,
Yeah. Yeah.
I digress,
No,
Phil. I go off at the tangent.
no, it's absolutely fine. So, just to clarify, in terms of what you're saying of using all these different sort of different scenarios, or like using something that they weren't expecting, and that kind of element of surprise, are we talking about, from your view, creativity here or not?
Yeah,
We are.
absolutely, 100%. And I think some things work with some students, some things don't work with other students. I mean, yeah, there's got to be scaffolding there. You've got to make sure you
Mm,
plan. But once you've got your idea of what you want to do, then you need to embellish it a little bit and make it more accessible.
hmm.
I was talking to a literacy coordinator today about decoding complicated language codes so that the students can access the information. You got to be. It's not that in my lessons I don't get things to read, but I'm very keen on decoding some of the language
Mm,
so they can access it, and then we recode it later so that they get the chance to reuse the more complicated language
mm,
that is around in education. Because quite a few students, or a lot of students, will look at a piece of text and go immediately, they'll go into anxiety mode
yeah.
about the fact that they don't understand, they don't recognize some of these words, and that can be a barrier as well. So you need to so if you're talking about a toolkit, make sure you the resources you're using are ones that you know are going to be accessible.
Mm,
uh, Stick to your rules, have your expectations. Oh, my wife's just come back in. um, um, but there's any number of little tricks that you can do. You've got the whiteboard, you've got the fill in the blanks, you've got the bingo, you've got come to the front and write down one thing you can remember, get them out the seats straight away,
mm,
all those things to get them in the mood for learning.
yeah.
Um, there's a lot there's any number of little
Yeah.
tricks you can use.
Mm.
Um,
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think it's been a very interesting conversation, and I hope some of the things that you've said would really be quite helpful for some people out there who are looking to try to master their skills in teaching, and just to enhance what they do, make a bigger impact, that kind of thing. My final question, and it's going to be one of those that I'm just going to ask you for a word. If you had to replace the word engagement with something else, as in, like, if there is another word that would equal engagement, because engagement is a word that you can't use anymore, what would that word be?
Curiosity.
Right. Thank you very much, Steve.
No, my pleasure, Phil. Thank you.